barking?
Oh God, that would be our wiener dogs.
Yeah, it's funny. Usually it's when Jonathan's on the show that we have the barking dog in the background. So now I do have the link. Of course, we're already on the air. That is okay. We'll call this the pre-production segment. Hope that works.
Oh, I take it back. I read 2 other comics. I forgot about that. I don't know if you guys know, but IDW does like a Mickey Mouse series, and started reading a bit of that, and it's really good. It was like Saturday morning cartoon.
All right, here we go for real. So welcome aboard, everybody, to a Scene and Nerd special segment. Okay, great. So now I just tweeted it out, so now like I'm getting super hammer retweeted. So I am one of your co-hosts, Agasicles, Stamas, GWW managing editor. Here with me tonight, I have the erstwhile and faithful Mr. Peter Morrow.
Hello.
And my steady partner in crime, Mr. Dave Pecci.
Hey.
So we are here tonight, kind of guerrilla radio rating the Scene and Nerd branding. We are not part of the regular standing Scene and Nerd crew, but we wanted to pocket this podcast under their moniker so that people would readily recognize this is an entertainment segment. So we're going to be talking Luke Cage episodes 1 and 2 tonight. I have been covering the series for the site, doing some pickup work for Everett Harn. So I just want to talk real quickly, because we only have about 30 minutes for this segment. I want to talk real quickly about how each of you are kind of coming to the series. So, Peter, what's your familiarity with the character and kind of your background on either Power Man or the Netflix MCU kind of lore to date before you started watching the show?
Well, I've seen all the the other Netflix MCU series thus far. As far as Luke Cage goes, my familiarity with him is only, or Power Man, is only really from the cartoons. Yeah, Spider-Man.
Was he in the? Oh, you mean the current Spider-Man or the old school?
The current
Okay.
Spider-Man, and he's been in some of the Avengers Assemble and Avengers cartoons. So I'm not completely familiar with him. I have the basic idea from the more modern Spider-Man series, which is actually not that bad.
Cool. Well, you got me, because I did not even know he was showing up in a car. So I was figuring that unless people had watched like the Netflix shows, that they were just completely unfamiliar with this character. So that's good to know. Dave, what about you?
So I read one Luke Cage comic book, and it was a combination of Luke Cage and Iron Fist, or Power Man and Iron Fist. So I kind of know a little bit about him and his personality, and then I know him from watching, Jessica Jones. So I definitely think that they're, portraying him right. He's kind of, this big tough guy, and and I hope they incorporate a little bit more of him as the convict kind of guy, kind of turn good, because that's kind of like my main understanding of him.
Okay. Now, how far? So we're going to be trying tonight to stick to episodes 1 and 2. But how far have you guys watched the show overall? How far in are you?
To
I've
two.
I've watched up to episode 3. The wife and I on Friday night, instead of packing, watched 3 episodes.
Cool. That made for a late night, and I'm sure a rugged day of travel the next day.
It was only a 3-hour drive.
Dave, what about you?
Just the two.
Okay, good. So you'll be the one who be. So now we have to be particularly careful that we don't tip our hand about anything coming up. So
Did you guys watch more?
I've watched up through episode 5.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that's because I'm sure some members of the editorial staff and entertainment group think that I'm delinquent, because we actually had early press access to the first 7 episodes, and so theoretically, the original plan was that I was gonna watch those 7 episodes and draft the reviews and have them ready to drop the same day as the show. But I'm exiting just having built a new PC, so I've still had a bundle of testing to get done. And when you build a big burly rig with GTX 1070s rigged in SLI, you get very tempted to game when maybe you should be doing other things. So, but I also got like a stomach bug or something for a couple of days during the week, so I came off my what was supposed to be my planned production battle rhythm. So I didn't get that done. So I'm trying to at least I think once I get the reviews up for the first 7 episodes, I'll trip back to a more moderate pace. But I think at least for mine, I think it'll be okay. I hope. So I'm coming at it. Wow. So yeah. So we're all over the place, which is always one of the most interesting things when we open up one of these segments. So I started collecting comics started reading comics in the 80s. So I was familiar with the old kind of Heroes for Hire moniker of Power Man and Iron Fist. That was their comic that was going on at the time, and so really only approached that character in a single comic that he was in tandem with Danny Rand. I've since I don't think I've read anything about that character since I've returned to comics in the 2000 teens. But I know there's been a pretty decent amount of separation, and each of those characters has been dealt with in their own solo titles. I probably read more Iron Fist in his solo title than Power Man. Go ahead.
I have a question since you've read more of the Luke Cage Power Man comic books. So one thing I wasn't quite sure if this is true of his story, but the series, I got this feel for, Black history, and, there's a clear presence of Keep Harlem Black. Now in the comics, is that really strong too, that whole cultural theme?
I'm not really sure, because like I said, I read that stuff in the 80s, and in the 80s it was very much focused on the notion of this kind of interracial superhero team, if you want to refer to it as that. And it was definitely more focused also, it was less on the background culture of Harlem. And I don't know exactly where the Heroes for Hire office was in this show. Now I have to check my reviews, so I need to make sure that I know what I'm talking about.
So the 80s, though, had this whole interracial hero thing going on, though.
Yeah, a little bit. What was I going to say?
Because I think I remember hearing about that, because that was a huge thing, because a lot of the heroes used to be mostly Caucasian, and then there was right,
and then when you did have like an African American hero, particularly in DC, they were always like black whatever. So I feel, to me, Power Man is like one of the first African American heroes who was not labeled like Black Power Man. or something like that. So yeah, but in the 80s, the conflict was much more so about Luke and Danny being heroes for hire and getting paid, and how that was in stark contrast to the way other heroes approached it. And I'd really like to. I read some of the comic book history of him. Like I never realized he was a member of the Defenders back in the day, and the Defenders were not the thing that Netflix is doing.
Right, I looked that up.
They were decidedly. The Defenders was like Doctor Strange, Valkyrie, the Incredible Hulk, Star Fox. I think at one point Moondragon. It was all these like really weird characters with a heavy touch of the mystical. They were not like street level, like Harlem or inner city kind of heroes, Hell's Kitchen type of stuff. But I read in that, and I didn't realize Moon Knight had been a member of the Defenders, even though Moon Knight is one of my favorite characters. But I read at one point like Power Man was a member of the Defenders, and then started complaining because his participation in the Defenders was cutting into his ability to take cases in Heroes for Hire. So basically, Mark Spector like started paying him to be on the Defenders. So it was much more about those kind of conflicts. But at any rate, so I'm coming at the show probably with a slightly heavier mix of Marvel Comics background and view of Luke Cage, and less of a Netflix view. So I have not completed Daredevil. I'm somewhere muddled in season 1, and I have not watched Jessica Jones. Not
oh
because
my gosh, they're so good.
Right, and I want to watch JJ, but I just haven't had time to get it on the docket. So that's our background and familiarity with Luke Cage and his story. So we open with with episode 1, subtitled "Moment of Truth." So we get introductions to the character. As far as I can tell, since you guys have more of the Netflix perspective than I do, so this takes place before the events in Jessica Jones. Is that right?
Yeah.
After.
Oh, is it after?
It's after.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So
some of the things that that Luke says to Pops, it puts it right after everything that happens in Jessica Jones. So particularly when he talks about, oh boy, I don't want to say it and spoil it for Agasicles.
No, I mean, you could go and spoil Jessica Jones.
Right. Particularly when he says that his rebound put a shotgun to his head.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, well, that's a good thing to clear up, because I've been watching the show thinking that it occurs before Jessica Jones. So, okay, so we open up with Luke Cage working for Pops, played by Frankie Faison, in Harlem. Luke is just kind of kind of a handyman. So he sweeps the shop, he cleans the windows, takes out trash, keeps the hot towels on hand and whatnot.
I don't want to sorry to interject, but one of the things that you're talking about, the barbershop, I totally thought that is another one of the, kind of an African-American cultural thing. Like I see in a lot of TV shows, like the barbershop is so present. So
yeah,
right? Or?
Yeah, it's definitely it's kind of funny. So it's definitely kind of a social center, and it's and I'll speak to it from my perspective. Yes, obviously I'm African American, but I grew up in the South, so some of those things will be similar, but some of those things will be different. In the South, I suspect it's similar elsewhere, but the barbershop is kind of a social center. People know each other. When you walk into your barbershop, the funny thing about it's actually part of the reason I don't go to the barbershop anymore and started shaving my head is because it's not atypical for you to walk into a barbershop and for the barber to know your mother and your aunt and inquire into your brothers and all that kind of stuff. And it's not. It's weird, right? Because it's not lots of any other place that I go, and that lots of people go, where there's a waiting room kind of environment, right? What do you look around and see people doing, right? They're all like in their iPads and on their iPhones with their headphones stuck in, listening to music. But I mean, it's a heavy, barbershops tend not to be silent, right? When you walk in, sometimes there are sports games on and people are crowded around that, and commentary going on about that. I actually, like I said, I actually stopped going to the barbershop just because it's not the quickest process in the world because it's such a social mecca. And I'm like, dude, I just don't have time to be in here for like an hour just trying to get my hair cut. So I get the culture. I have not been an active participant in it, but yeah. So and that's kind of exactly what you see, right, in Luke Cage episode 1. You get those social elements, and Pomps's barbershop is a little more than that. He's kind of a foster father to a lot of wayward kids, and is trying to get them on a good track. We get introduced to Cottonmouth and his cousin Mariah, who are probably in a similar relationship that Pops has with his kids. There's references to a Mama Mabel, who probably was some type of surrogate mother or foster mother who kind of took them in and raised them. And Cottonmouth wound up becoming the mastermind mobster criminal. And Mariah, played by Alfred Woodard, wound up going into politics. So we kind of get some level setting in this episode. It's actually a little tough for me to recall exactly what went down in episode 1 because my review for it went up on the site before the show dropped, so it was spoiler free. So I actually have nothing in the review about anything that actually occurred in the episode. But like I said, you kind of get some level setting. You get Misty Knight introduced, so that was cool. I did not, as with most things, I didn't do a lot of pre-reading about the show because I wanted to be as surprised as I could. And so I did not, I guessed that she was Misty Knight before the name was dropped, which I don't think gets dropped until episode 2. So that was pleasant to see her in there. And what we get a lot of building out is of the backdrop of Harlem itself. So that's as much of a rundown on episode 1 as I can do. And we'll probably just segue. I'm fine if we just go back and forth between 1 and 2 at this point, rather than doing a rundown of episode 2. So,
Yeah.
So just overall, what's your guys' feeling of the cast and their overall kind of chemistry and dynamic on screen?
I liked, and his name is escaping me, the actor who played Luke Cage from Jessica Jones. I really liked his the portrayal of the character. He seemed pretty true to what I know of the source material, and which is always nice. And in general, he played a pretty likable guy. So I was, in all respects, so I was pretty happy to see him return and continue on. Everyone else, they all seemed pretty natural to me. I didn't really feel that anyone was forcing it, for instance. So overall, I liked the cast.
Yeah, that of and of course the Luke Cage headliner is Mike Coulter, who was also the original voice, at least, of Spartan Locke in Halo 5. But yeah, so yeah, that's those are kind of my feelings too. More and more as I watch the series and we see it across 1 and 2, I'm coming to the realization that Mike Coulter is really something special. Like he does this amazing thing, and partly it's the script writing, but I really look at Luke Cage as kind of the closest thing that I've seen to like a kind of a Greek tragedy on TV in recent history. And there's this heavy peppering of what I want to say. Heavy peppering of references to poetry, throughout the show, and like I said, that's just kind of the vibe that I get from it. Dave, what are your feelings about the cast and cast chemistry?
I agree with you on there, but what did you mean by the poetry part? Because I don't think I caught on to that watching it.
So Luke Cage is a heavy reader of poetry and literature. He's just constantly reading. So there's not tons of referential drops in the show. They're kind of small, but like I said, the connection to this notion of it as a Greek tragedy is something I've just kind of built out for my own perception of the show. Just kind of being this central character who has a background in tragedy, but is kind of trying to find his way, right? And how, just how many times, despite the fact that he's done nothing wrong, he still gets the blame. But by the same token, always tries to remain above board and true to himself, regardless of how people perceive him.
Yeah, I totally agree. I didn't think about it that way, but yeah.
So Dave, what were your feelings about the cast and cast chemistry?
Oh yeah, I just said I agreed with you guys. I thought they were all very good.
Okay, cool. So one thing about the show I realized in writing the reviews as I go searching for images and media to add into the review, a lot of this show takes place at night, which is very difficult to film. Peter, you're our resident photography and film expert. So what are your feelings on the cinematography that you've seen through episodes 1 and 2?
I liked it. Lighting was dark, of course, but I've noticed that in these Marvel Netflix shows that the lighting is much darker, much more similar to what we see in the DC movie universe, which can be a good and bad thing, but I think they do it well enough. I mean, you can see the details. The dynamic range is such that you can see the dark, what's going on in the dark and the light, and they control those contrasts really nicely, I think. So overall, I don't fault them for anything they do. But this is Marvel Studios and Netflix. I mean, if they get this one wrong, there's something going on.
Right.
We need to take away their movie card.
No doubt. Yeah. So Dave, you brought up some things earlier about kind of how this is a unique experience for you, just kind of having aspects of African American and maybe even more specifically culture in Harlem being brought to the fore. Anything else that you picked up on or noticed or had questions about? Or
so yeah, it was very prevalent. Like you could the club, the R&B music was playing, and if I recall, like I'm no history buff, but I'm pretty sure that was an African American music that they invented, right, in the '60s or blues. It was one of those that was playing in the first two. And then the other thing that I caught on to was also kind of the cinematography I felt was different than Jessica Jones. And the other thing that I also thought too was the third thing that kind of bugged me was I felt episode 1 and the first part of episode 2 there wasn't a lot of Luke Cage, but I kind of got it because they're trying to like set up the story. And then at the second half, and then I watched a little bit of episode 3, then it started to be more about Luke Cage, and I was like, okay, I'm happy.
okay.
You bring up a good point, though. Every single one of these Marvel shows that have come out has a different cinematic feel to it.
Yeah, totally agree.
A different filming quality. Daredevil relies heavily on a lot of shadows. Jessica Jones relies heavily on that stalker type of following you all around. And
yeah,
I'm not sure what to define Luke Cage's as yet.
It feels. To me, it feels a bit like a '90s kind of a '90s. What do you call it? Those like police shooter movies types. I don't know. That's just kind of the feel that I get.
Like Training Day, or
yeah, I can't think of an exact example.
Or Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, more like Lethal Weapon. Lethal Weapon.
Well, the two movies that I called out that the show reminds me of or makes me feel like I'm seeing again are Wesley Snipes' New Jack City, which was maybe a late '80s flick, but very kind of seminal in what it represented at the height of kind of the drug epidemic in the U.S. And then also a movie that probably not a lot of people have seen called In Too Deep, which stars Omar Epps and LL Cool J. And LL plays a particularly brutal mobster in that movie, opposite Omar Epps as an undercover, I think, New York cop. And that's, and Cottonmouth reminds me very much of those two actors' performances. But then also in that feel. It's interesting that you guys say that they each have a different, that each of the Netflix original series in the Marvel Universe have a different feel. And so part of the fault is mine for not having watched them. I'm going to also say part of the problem then is how Netflix is marketing and how their adverts are working. Because having watched a little bit of Daredevil, and then having been assaulted with all the trailers for Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, when I see those trailers, they all feel the same. Like I feel like and I walked into Luke Cage like not having a huge notion for its potential because I felt like all of these Netflix shows are the same. And I haven't looked very hard at the writing staff. I know that there are some. I know that there's a specific ethnic bend, what is being done with Luke Cage and who they have running that show, to make sure it feels like authentic Harlem, I think. But I felt like they were all the same. Now that I'm getting deeper into the meat of Luke Cage, like I said, I'm picking out some specific thematic choices that I reckon are different from those other shows. But you don't get that unless you watch all of the shows, right? And it's easy to foist that on reviewers and media guys like us who are covering this stuff, but for the viewer, the first tip over point is just getting them to watch the show. So I wonder if there's something that they could do or should do differently about their marketing and branding and advertising to onboard more people.
The other thing that just came to mind when you were talking too was it just kind of hit me was that Daredevil, Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage, they all kind of talk, and I've read reviews about people talking about this, they all hit some sort of moral thing in society. So like with Daredevil, there's this theme of religion, sin, and good versus evil. Jessica Jones, there's sexuality, because there's the same-sex couple in there. And now we're getting into, racial stuff. So I think that's pretty cool. I mean, it makes it feel more real and relatable to actual life, because I feel that's one thing you don't see a lot in the DC is kind of this more meaty, like actual things that are going on in our world today.
No, yeah, I definitely get that. So where do you guys think the show's shortfalls are right now?
I'm biased, and I don't think there's a lot. Honestly, I guess the only thing that bugged me too was the trailer. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I thought there should have been a little bit more action in these first two Luke Cage episodes. And it seemed I didn't watch, I kind of shortly glimpsed through episode 3, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to pick up on the action yet. A lot of him beating up on criminals or anything like that. Because I'm used to in Daredevil and Jessica Jones, where there's a lot of we're gonna get straight into the action.
Yeah, it's definitely a little more slow burn, I think, than their shows. But to me, it's typical of what you would expect from a superhero show. I think Daredevil and JJ are maybe the exceptions to that rule. But yeah, it's definitely a slow burn, and there are definitely some issues with it, which we will discuss in a later episode. Um, but yeah, it's a weird feeling for me right now, and I wrote this in the review. Like, I mean, people who know me, like my trademark statement when I'm watching things like this is I hate, despise the time that we have from the origin story until they get into the costume, right?
Yeah.
Not the intermediate, like not the Daredevil, like the black thing with the black hood, but like the thing. And like I said, people who know me well know that the whole time I'm screaming, put on the damn suit. Like I say that for like, and thankfully we've had things like, thankfully we've had things like Supergirl where she's in the costume like the first episode, right? They figure that out. But like Daredevil, and like I said, I haven't even gotten to it yet in my viewing of that. He takes a long spool up. I really liked the Seth Rogen Green Hornet, but man, I was frustrated. It's like sitting through all the like he and Kato bickering and fighting, and I'm just like, I just want these guys to arrive. Like I want them to get to that point in the movie where they are the Green Hornet and Kato, and you get that in like the last like 15 minutes of the movie. So so all these things with the build-ups to, and this is why I don't like Spider-Man movies that go through the origin, because I'm like, I just want to see modern, mature, combat-ready Spider-Man taking on foes that challenge his capability, right? Like my favorite thing about Spider-Man, and I'm diverging a little bit, but like my favorite thing of Spider-Man when I started reading comics in the 80s was I picked up an issue of like, I think it was Web of Spider-Man, which was a new series that started off in the 80s. And like the first few issues of that, if I remember it correctly, was he was fighting some new villain named Puma who like hit him with like tore like a vent pipe off the roof of like a New York high rise and like hit him with it in the shoulder and dislocated his shoulder. And his shoulder was like ganked up for like several issues afterwards. Right. And so I'm like, that's what I want to see. I don't want to see like the fledgling thing, and I especially go through a lot of angst. The thing with Luke Cage is there's not really any suit for him to put on, right? Like I know they're not going to put him in the 80s like the yellow button down disco shirt with the chain around his waist, right? I know they're not going to do that. So
No, but I don't know if I should spoil this, but there is like a reference to Jessica Jones, like kind of 70s looking outfit. So I'm hoping that maybe that they at least have some sort of reference to it in there. That would be funny.
Right. All right. So, but yeah. So Peter, before I drop mine, what did you have any things where you felt like the show was falling short in these first two episodes?
Honestly, no. I overall enjoyed them. I thought they did a pretty decent job of. Come to think of it, though, I kind of wish there'd been more character development with some of the antagonists, and maybe that happens later on. I'm excited to find out, but I would like to know more about the families or the family, more about the bonds, and I know we get some of those, like bonds between Pops and Cottonmouth, and I know we see some of that later on. But it would have been nice to have a little bit more. But again, I feel like we're going to get that anyway,
Right.
at least to a certain degree. So I'm not, overall, I can't really find anything that I can say, yes, that's something that's wrong with it. It's just, it's good.
So,
in my opinion.
Yeah. So my feelings were, so I was very lukewarm after episode 1. Right. I gave that episode a 6.5 on our 10 on our 20 point ratings, 20 increment rating scale that goes from a 0.0 up to 10.0. And mainly it's because while I feel like Mike Coulter brings a lot to the show, like I feel like everyone else is kind of window dressing. Like I feel like the other performances in episode 1 were really very workmanlike and not anything particularly special. I feel like Alfre Woodard in particular struggles in her role, and I feel like being this very, formally trained, like Emmy Award winning, SAG Award winning actress, I feel like she's really struggling to get back down to like a street level urban um, rendering of a Harlem politician, and a lot of her dialogue just comes off as stuff she's just uncomfortable with, right? Like especially when her character dips it. So I'm in an interracial marriage, right? My wife is white. There are things that my wife sometimes tries to pull off, and I'm like, no, you need to not do that like ever again. Like whenever she tries to do like urban hip hop slang or anything, I'm like no, just and there are certain lines that Alfre Woodard has that I feel like that too. I'm like, the scriptwriters just need to figure something out with that, or she needs to figure something out with it. And so, but other than Mike Coulter and Frankie Faison, who plays Pops in the show, I just felt like a lot of the other portrayals were just very softball. Theo Rossi, who plays Shades, I feel like he has a lot of. I feel like there's something like smoldering beneath the surface on him, and I feel like once they let him play more of an active role, he's very much this silent character in the background, right? In episodes 1 and 2, so. And I felt like in episodes 1 and 2, Frank Whaley, also who plays Detective Scarfe, also didn't get a chance to really spread his wings. So in episode 1, I just felt like things were very weak. In episode 2, which I rated an 8.5, I think there was a huge upswell, mainly driven by those one-on-one scenes between Luke and Pops. I felt like those were like, those were very much, those were at the same level of like Grant Gustin and what is his name, Wesley Anderson Ship or whatever, the guy who plays Barry's father on The Flash. I felt like they were like the same level of scenes that those two pull off, or between Grant and Joe on The Flash. So, and unfortunately, of course, through episode 2, just make sure I'm not spoiling anything. Is unfortunately, of course, at the end of episode 2, they kill Pops. So.
That was too soon. I don't know, but maybe that was good because then that kind of sets Luke Cage up, to be the hero he is.
Right. And so that's where I leave off. At the end of episode 2, my question at that point is so Frankie Faison is the only really great thing for Mike Coulter to bounce off of in the show. What do we have to look forward to? For somebody like me who the things I love in the CW shows now, right, are those great emotional hooks in The Flash. Like I said, between Grant and Joe, and Grant and his dad, and on Supergirl, the interaction between the two sisters. I don't know where you get that from in this show, and I feel like to keep an urban grounded show like this fresh and make it something different, you have to have that great emotional hook that is something beyond the love interest, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's got to be something that feels like family, because that's what, if there's anything Berlanti's crew has struck on, that's what they do in those CW shows, right? They make it, they find something, even if it's like a surrogate family, they find that kind of bond to build, and that's what anchors you emotionally. So, any other thoughts on episodes 1 and 2? I know we're kind of pressed for time tonight, unfortunately, but
none that I have.
Overall, and I say overall, I think these were great introduction episodes. They weren't perfect, and in retrospect, I kind of agree with you, Agasicles, about the the councilwoman, as she's constantly referred to. Some of her dialogue is very uncomfortable, but at the time, I attributed that to her not being entirely comfortable with Cottonmouth's methods. So I could forgive her for a little bit for that. I would like to see her character grow a bit more comfortable with what she's doing if they're going to continue in that in that field, but we'll see. Otherwise, like I said, overall, these are great introductory episodes.
Yeah, I love the Dave mentioned like I love the background of the hip hop culture and the musical bend in it. It my wife and I watch Empire, and it definitely kind of harkens to that level of musical influence, and just kind of, I mentioned this in my reviews, but it's kind of this musical renaissance that we've seen on TV, with networks being more comfortable getting back to shows that have music as a central component of their storytelling. But yeah, so yeah, I think, like you said, I think I see the potential in the show. I don't think the show is nearly perfect. I know there are some people who like watch like the first few episodes and they were like, show's amazing, greatest thing since sliced bread. Kind of the same kind of groundswell of support that we saw from the Daredevil drop. But I feel like the show definitely has kind of some shaky legs on the stool that I'm hoping they will work out as it goes on. So any final thoughts before we wrap things up? I guess I do want to ask too, as part of your sign off or outro statements, how do you guys feel the show measures up against Daredevil and Jennifer Jones, and rather than asking you guys to say, declare one being better than the other, my question is, do you just feel like it's in the same class and on the same level as the other Marvel Netflix series, or do you think it is above or below?
I think it's still very good quality. It's just a different style right now. It's just not actiony, and I'm just wondering if they meant it not to be as actiony and to be more about, his redemption and, the Harlem culture and the struggle that they have and what it's like to, to grow up, in that type of culture.
No, that's a great take, and something I wouldn't have considered if you hadn't brought it up, Dave. That conjointly, while you take a show and you spin it in a definitely racial and ethnic direction and focus, that you also concurrently take the creative step to not make it as much about the violence. And that'll be an interesting thing to explore in later episodes, because I've been wondering if that's deliberate, and I'm wondering if that dynamic has to do with. So I haven't gone back and looked a lot at like what Jessica Jones's like relative power level is from like a Marvel wiki kind of standpoint, but obviously Daredevil, while highly skilled from just a strength and like damage standpoint, like is toe to toe with the people he's going up against, right? Luke Cage brings a much heavier bat to the fight, right? So, how do you contend with this significantly more powerful being that you're going to drop into the kind of the street level, topical area, and then how do you deal with that, right? It's kind of like the Superman thing, right? Do you and of course, because of my age and just kind of where I was at the time, things were coming out. Like I was a big fan of Lois and Clark, right? And one of those creative directions they took is just like the title of the show. That was a Clark Kent story. It was not really about Superman, and so they dealt with things slightly differently than you might approach, a big screen rendition of Superman, right? So Peter, your thoughts and minor comparative state view of how the show stacks up against Daredevil and Jennifer Jones.
Overall, I actually think it fits nicely in the two existing ones. I like slow burns. I like the eventual payoff, and the payoff that I happen to know is coming. As far as the violence goes, it sates your needs. And I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but I think we all know that's coming. But like with Jessica Jones, we didn't see Kilgrave in the beginning. You know, with Daredevil, we didn't. Actually, I don't know what they held back with Daredevil. Maybe that.
Well, no, Kingpin wasn't in the first season, right? Kingpin came in the
no.
second.
No, he was in the first season, just not the first couple episodes.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean they didn't, you know, blow everything all at once, and I like that, you know, get you into the story a little bit and then give you the action. So I like that, how that is organized in the shows so far. Thank you for reminding me about Kingpin. God.
Well, and let me ask you a question too, because again, one of my detriments against the show detractors was, you know, we talk about these performances. I have this feeling of performances that aren't great, and one of those is Ali's portrayal of Cottonmouth, and maybe not just his portrayal, but the scripting. Like, I just feel like that guy, he's just an African American kingpin, and I keep waiting for him to branch and become something more than that. Do you have kind of the same feeling? Do you feel like he's, I mean, you have to be a really great actor to match, to even talk about matching up to D'Onofrio's portrayal of Kingpin. So maybe that's too high an expectation, but I mean, what are your feelings about how he stacks up against Kingpin?
No, I think your thoughts are perfect. I think that perhaps that's exactly what they're going for. He thinks himself a Kingpin. He thinks himself Wilson Fisk. And in fact, that comment is made in, I think, the first episode. And I think that's what he sees himself as. And I think his character development is going to be when he, you know, really figures things out. That's my opinion. I haven't seen obviously more than the first few episodes, so I'm thinking that's the direction they're going to take it.
Okay, cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks a lot. Anybody who joined in or anybody who watches this later, unfortunately, we are out of time. We're actually a good bit over being out of time, but please join us next week when we will discuss episodes 3 and 4. I know people are binge watching this and kind of smashing through it, but I think it's worthwhile. You know, I've been doing reviews on single episodes, and we're going to be doing these discussions 2 episodes at a time. I think there's value in kind of picking them apart on a slightly more atomic scale and not talking about like 13 episodes viewed in the course of 2 days. So I think there's, particularly in this show, I think there's a lot more going on beneath the surface that warrants that deeper dive. So thanks a lot for joining in. As always, we have been the Geeks of Geeks Worldwide. Join us next week again for episode 2 of Harlem Nights, talking Luke Cage, and we are out of here.